Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Talking Serverless podcast. This is your host, Joshua Proto, and I am super excited to welcome back one of my favorite guests that we've interviewed, Anthony Campolo. Anthony Campolo is a developer advocate for Step, Zen, and Redwood.js. They are the host of the FS Jam podcast and a great open source supporter, and I'm just super happy to have you back on. I know I really enjoyed our conversation last time, so thanks so much for taking the time to meet with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. I'm really excited. I very much enjoyed our last conversation as well. We hit on so many interesting topics that I'm really passionate about and that we'll get to expand upon in this episode. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. I know, last time we talked so much about Redwood.js and sort of like maybe the state of open source and getting involved in open source. And, since then I have sort of experimented and dabbled with a couple more open source projects, more on I'd say the blockchain side than the serverless side.
Really? I have some friends who are getting into blockchain as well, so I'll be curious to hear about that.
Yeah, no, totally. And I've been seeing certain parts of this blockchain world is starting to embrace like serverless and embracing like GraphQL. And so when I saw that you're now doing this advocacy work for StepZen and how it's leveraging GraphQL, I'd love to hear. I don't know too much about it. I would love to learn a little bit more about StepZen. Like, why is it valuable? And like, how is it using GraphQL? Like, what's going on here?
Absolutely. It's how I would describe it. If you want to be descriptive about it, it's managed GraphQL API gateway. That's essentially what it gets you. So it makes it really easy just to spin up a GraphQL server so you can just get it up there, have an endpoint so you can hit it and that you can do anything you want with it. But on top of that, it also lets you stitch different backends and different data types together into your one unified schema. So it's kind of like this really cool tool for integrating different pieces together, which is why the blockchain GraphQL stuff is really interesting. It's the same idea of we have all these different chains all trying to talk to each other. It's kind of like a mesh-like thing. So it's a tool that leverages GraphQL in a way that also gives you a nice CLI with this whole deployment thing built in. So they're also hosting that API for you as well. So there's other kind of like open source projects that are doing things like this, like GraphQL Mesh, but you would have to like run that yourself. Whereas this is like, not only do they have this whole thing built out, but you also can get your endpoint up and just like have a whole project going really quickly.
Fantastic. That sounds like super useful. Is there any like, I don't know, like current projects that have been sort of like keystone moments or like keystone use cases? Is it a lot of blockchain or is it, just a variety of use cases right now?
Not blockchain. It's more in the Jamstack and kind of React front end area right now. And it's about getting these different backends, whether it's like, Shopify or Airtable or, these different kind of like e-commerce things and headless CMSs, and how do you stitch that all together into one thing that is like unified for your front end. And it's really interesting because that's a lot what Redwood was. We were talking about Redwood in our previous episode. And for anyone who hasn't heard that one, Redwood is a React framework that also has a GraphQL kind of middle layer that lets your front and your back end talk to each other. So I had been doing work with Redwood, and then Anat, who's the CEO of StepZen, kind of saw what I was doing and reached out to me. And it's been really cool because like when I first talked to you, like I didn't even have a job. Like I was still like just coming out of my boot camp and like doing all this and trying to make it in this whole thing. And like it all paid off. And so, because one of the things you had asked me in our previous episode was like, what I'd gotten out of open source, and like whether it was worth it or not. And I said how for me it paid off 100%, like, a million times. And so, but there was a lot of alternative realities where it couldn't have necessarily worked out that well. So in many ways, I'm very lucky that it worked out the way it did. But it's been a way to kind of expand out for me all this other stuff that's happening in the GraphQL ecosystem, because Redwood is opinionated. It gives you a whole stack of all the pieces you need to have a full stack GraphQL project, and it just like gives you that, so you can just kind of take it and run with it and not think about it too much. And that's really nice. But at the same time, then you have a hard time actually kind of grokking like, okay, but like what is the difference between Apollo and Urkel? Like that's a really hard question to answer actually, and you have to really kind of dig into this stuff to start to understand it. So yeah, that's what I've been kind of working on and getting spun up with over the last couple months, and doing a similar thing to what I did with Redwood, to where I'll build out projects, and then I'll blog about it, and I'll do live streams about it, and I'll go do podcast interviews about it. And so now I'm kind of had my like, all right, I can understand steps, and now I can kind of build with it. Now I kind of go out and communicate with it, and then now start dialoguing with people about it and see, like, does it make sense to them? Like, what are they looking to get out of it, and all that kind of stuff.
Wow, fantastic. I love to, you're super happy to hear that, what is it? If working in open source was like already at 100%, return for your time, then now it's like maybe 200% or even more. So great to see that, it really pays dividends. And, what is it? Sort of a saying that I definitely, I think, believe to be true is like to the degree that we can create our own future, we don't need to predict it. And open source is really interesting because there's a lot of opportunities to sort of create the features or create the future of the projects that you're working on. And it definitely seems like if you can demonstrate your ability to do that, then hey, the world is your oyster in that sort of way. So really interesting to see just how like Redwood is sort of leveraging like GraphQL and working around that. What do you think is sort of the what was Redwood always sort of going in this direction? Do you think that, I think like, was Redwood always going into this direction, and what's sort of like next? Like, what are some exciting things going on with Redwood that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, Redwood was originally architected for GraphQL, and having worked with Redwood is what set me up really well to kind of get what was happening with StepZen, because GraphQL is a spec. So for people who've never kind of gotten the whole GraphQL 101, it's a query language for APIs, and it's a way for your front end to talk to your back end. And the way you do that is basically just like by throwing kind of what looks like JSON kind of objects back and forth. If you just imagine a JSON object with just the keys, it's like key value pair, just the keys, not the values. So you say you want person, and then you want their name, and then you'll get back name like Josh. And that's kind of what the query response is. And that's, I guess, the whole deal. It's very, very simple. But then you can also do mutations as well. So you can do the whole create, read, update, delete all combined within this query language. And so for Redwood, that query language is how your React front end talks to your back end, and like via Prisma. That's like a kind of step in the chain, but still GraphQL is kind of what gets you from the front all the way to the back. And this is because Tom and Peter created Redwood based on their experience building Chatterbug, which was a language learning platform that involved a React front end speaking GraphQL to a Rails backend. And so they kind of wanted to build a framework that would be better integrated for these kind of technologies. But what it doesn't really do is it doesn't let you reach out beyond itself. Like Redwood is very self-contained. It's like a full stack framework. That's the whole idea. It's like a Ruby on Rails kind of thing. But part of this whole Jamstack idea is how do we pull in other APIs to do all this other stuff and create all this other functionality. And so that's where something like StepZen comes in, because you can get this gateway that then becomes another step in the chain. So your front end can speak, your Redwood front end can speak to the back end, the Redwood API, and that API can talk to your StepZen API, and that API can talk to like all this other stuff. So it opens you up to this wider world of possibilities of what you can do with a Redwood app, in the sense that you, as a Redwood developer, could not just write all that logic to translate like all these different REST APIs into a GraphQL schema. Like that's just not a thing that you have the time or that you maybe the experience to do. But that's what you can do with StepZen. It gives you the ability to like write these kind of schemas and then plug in endpoints and do that whole translation.
Wow, very cool. I definitely see, in a lot of the world, what is it? In like the cloud services world, sometimes there still are these problems or these comments about like vendor lock-in, and like to which degree are they really a problem, and to how do you sort of account for that, or account for applications that are very tightly coupled to certain ecosystems, or tightly coupled and just like certain architectures or the ways of making the projects. And sometimes I think that even expands out to just like who you have working on the projects, and like what are everyone's sort of preferences for how they develop, and whatever the develop experience standards that you're sort of setting. So being able to like, I don't know, have your systems be able to play nicely with what could happen in the future. Because one thing that is like, we can never predict exactly what's going to happen. So if we have access to, a whole infinite amount of APIs, and that's probably just better for the ecosystem long term anyway. So that's really exciting to see, because I remember, hearing from you and seeing a lot of positive things being happening with Redwood.js. And if you're able to sort of crack that nut, like seems like they are doing, then you just have way more possibilities as far as like mass adoption. And that's sort of like one of the golden desires of the open source projects is mass adoption.
And what's cool is that it can work with anything you want in terms of different front end technologies. You could use it just as easily with Vue or even vanilla JavaScript. And so we're going to have a lot of docs with lots and lots of different examples that we're building out right now of all these different ways you can use it, so that kind of whoever comes to it will be able to like meet them halfway with whatever tech they already do kind of know, because it's a big ask to have someone learn not only GraphQL, but then this tool built on top of it. So if you can meet people halfway, like, all right, well, if you know React really well, then I can get you like halfway there, because we have this like React front end that's speaking to all this crazy GraphQL stuff in the back that we can kind of like set up for you and give you good defaults for, and then you can just like write most of the front end stuff yourself. And it's like that's kind of similar idea to what Redwood was to a certain extent. So it's really cool, and it allows us to think in a similar mindset of like the full stack and the front end, back end, how it all fits together into this kind of soup that is FSJam, as I like to say, full stack Jamstack.
No, I love it. I like the idea of I don't know what the full stack is like a soup, just like the mesh of interconnectedness. And I think and instances where I've seen where like teams are like hyper siloed out, and even when there are people who are responsible for different elements of maybe just like one side of like a traditional backend or a traditional front end, just the disintegration just can like negatively impact projects in every single way imaginable. And I think even just approaching something that very much is like a soup, and like from the user standpoint, like if you're developing a web app, something complicated, the user ideally is having a seamless experience. They're not seeing everything connect and trace and break down, and the fail safes activating and then rerouting the request and then pulling out a cache someplace and then getting it delivered. So that's a very interesting point. And I know you were mentioning that there were some new developments with Jamstack, or ways that it was thinking about like leveraging serverless and its serverless components. And as talking serverless, I know I'm very excited to hear a little bit about that, or for you to elaborate a bit for everyone listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Like any of these things, since these are all just like APIs that are on the open internet, it's very easy to start to stitch them all together with things like these kind of serverless functions as we think of them like traditionally, like where this all kind of started, which is like Lambda, going back to I just want to be able to write these functions in whatever language I want to write, as long as that language is JavaScript or Python. And eventually they added a bunch more languages, but the real idea was you want to be able to just write code in the language that makes sense to you and deploy that code to the world. And so you can create like Google Cloud functions that are going to stitch together different parts of your backend. Now, ideally, you shouldn't have to do that. That's kind of the stuff that we're doing to make all this work in a nice, seamless way. So like you don't have to, but if you want to, that's like a thing to do. And I've actually been like going very deep down this rabbit hole, because we're in the process of trying to make Redwood as portable as possible, because everyone talks about vendor lock and all the time, and whether your thing can kind of work cross-platform. And it was designed for Lambda, specifically AWS Lambda. The idea is that your entire backend API is one giant Lambda function. And it's something that if you listen to a lot of serverless people, you'll frequently hear them specifically tell you not to do this. There's a whole serverless like guide now that just came out in like the last month on AWS, which is really, really good. And there's a whole section called anti-patterns. The first anti-pattern is the Lambda monolith. So we are the anti-pattern when it comes to serverless. Like we are the embodiment of the anti-pattern, but it works. And like to the extent of like you could put that sucker online, hit it, and it's going to give you information back. But you eventually hit a point where you need to start breaking it off into these smaller pieces to actually get it to work the way serverless is supposed to work, as your listeners, as serverless people probably know. But there is a strange tension between, first off, the different types of JavaScript you're writing, either the different types of node you're writing. So if you think about Lambda versus Azure versus Google, they're all giving you basically node, and they all have been like at different levels of node 10 or 12 or 14, and kind of getting further and further with that. And they have slightly different semantics in terms of like what they pass in, like context object versus like event object versus callback object, and how you actually deal with the requests and responses. Because with Google, like you actually just kind of bring in Express. Like they literally just give you Express. And that's not exactly what you get from the other ones. And then there's the next level then is like Cloudflare. Because Cloudflare doesn't give you node at all, period. There's no node. And this confuse people because it's running on V8. So people hear, oh, it's running on V8. Node runs on V8. So that means you can run Node on Cloudflare. I was like, no, that's not how this works. They took the thing that Node is built with and then built another thing. So that's why you can write JavaScript that's going to be agnostic to any of that stuff if you want to use something like Cloudflare Workers. So yeah, there's a lot of layers to this, and it's all very baked into the kind of progression of JavaScript, the language, and Node and ESM, and like all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it's interesting and very confusing for people.
No, I think it's really interesting, like what you were talking about. Maybe I'm not fully understanding, but around like what is it? The phrase that you said that I'm hearing a lot is like, being able to write your code however you're writing it, sort of like language agnostically, and then getting it just to work with your system. And I think I see that maybe as like I would say as far as like trends are going, I think that's a trend that I'm seeing more talked about. That being said, I think I'm operating in a space where that generally isn't as much of an option, or at least the way things are done with the number of clients that I'm working with at the moment, that Serverless Guru is working with. We don't necessarily have those options, even though it would be nice. And so I'm wondering, just sort of, I don't know, what sort of challenges are you seeing with like how that actually gets does that break down? Like, is there a point to where like under the hood that sounds fantastic, I wish I could do that, and that's sort of like I wish, and I hope to travel again one day, and if I could do that as well just in real life, that would be amazing. But I can't speak into Google Translate in front of people and then show them my phone. They'll think I'm weird. So there's like a human disconnect there. But as far as like under the hood, is there like, what are the challenges in doing something like that?
Yeah, I can tell you specifically where it breaks. It breaks at Apollo Server. So Apollo Server Lambda is where the actual functions API thingy-majig is being deployed. And traditionally, what has happened is it gets deployed on Netlify, and Netlify is running your Lambdas under the hood for you. They call them Netlify functions. Netlify functions are Lambdas, for anyone who doesn't know. And that is what you would originally do. But you can't plug and play that with Azure. And so I know this because I'm working with Thomas, who is a Microsoft employee on this right now. And we are basically having to entirely extract out Apollo Server. And there's a very, very interesting project right now called GraphQL Helix from the Guild that is potentially going to have an integration with Redwood support where you can make the server swappable, because we made Apollo Client swappable back in like January, and this became really incredible things that allowed us to have a React query provider. So for people who don't know all this kind of like front end React kind of stuff, React query is a data fetching library for React. So just like hitting an endpoint, doing a query, and getting data back, and handling all this kind of cache stuff that goes along with it. It's by Tanner Lindsley, and it's like massively popular right now in the React world. And so Apollo Client is how we handle the stuff that they would do, that React Query does. And then you just have to figure out how do you want to handle the actual GraphQL calls themselves. So what you do is you have React Query with GraphQL Request, which is a lightweight GraphQL client. And then you put them together, and then you swap out Apollo for that. And then you have your Redwood now is decoupled out the Apollo client. So we're getting close to the point where you can do the same thing with the server. And that's hopefully going to allow us to then be able to plug and play this into all these different deployed targets in a simpler way so we don't have to rewrite the API for every single deployed target.
Yeah, that would be no bueno. Definitely, that is not a. It's if in a world of infinite time, it could be fine. What's the timeline for this on the roadmap? Like, this seems like it would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, right now the kind of Azure stuff, and then even further out the Cloudflare stuff is not on the V1 roadmap. This is kind of stuff that I am self-directedly doing because I find this stuff really interesting, and I know people who can help with it. And this stuff all requires kind of like integration between. It requires expertise on both ends to make work. But the render stuff is what people should really be looking at, because that is shipped and that is like good to go and is really going to be one of the best ways to actually deploy these kind of apps. Because what render has is kind of like a Heroku for people who haven't used it. If you also then get a lot of that nice kind of front-endy Netlify static hosting type stuff as well. So it's very much like full stack. You get all the kind of stuff you want. And then you can build your whole project together. Because that's been the problem in the past, is we would deploy the front end on something like a Netlify or a Vercel, and then you grab a database environment variable for somewhere like a Heroku or like a Railway. Whereas now on render, you can actually host the full stack, the entire app on render specifically. So it's like, again, get back, I see ultimate vendor lock-in, but if you're okay with like going in on this one platform, or like it's like a really, really nice integrated experience, and your code doesn't have to change at all. Like because once you actually figure out the build process, that's the thing, is like, because you don't have to like rewrite the API, because it's just all these different hosting providers just have ways of like building your assets and sending it to them. And it's just kind of like you have to figure out exactly how their system wants you to get those assets to them so that they can get onto the internet. There's like some weird kind of translation, because they'll do it a little bit differently, and all the frameworks do it a little bit differently also. So it's kind of everyone's kind of trying to align on how we actually want to do this and what's the best way to do this. And so there's so many things happening around there. But for us on like V1, it's just about really like making sure the framework itself is solid, which means things like full TypeScript support and things like accessibility features baked in, which we have gotten in recently, of things like the route announcement, which actually Next ended up adding a little bit after, and which is great because Dom was looking at his work on that. And so it's really, really cool to see all the actual pieces of the framework come together. And then there's going to be a big push for like a more integrated tooling kind of experience with like VS Code plugin and stuff like that. So there's going to be really, really nice deploy targets and really, really nice features in the framework, and getting it stable before V1. That's pretty much like where we're at right now, and hopefully going to be soon. So
I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of like the accessibility features or your accessibility issues, and like your approach, just Redwood's approach. So how to sort of solve for that, because it's such accessibility is such an important thing to be designing for. And like, accessibility means 100%. And sometimes, I don't know, I've seen on Twitter, I've seen places, and they're like, well, should we really be like, I don't know, designing for such like a small, like a percentage of population or potential users or use cases. But true accessibility means 100% of the people can use it. It's not only for like 2% or whatever the numbers is. And I'm just interested to hear like, how does this project like approach this very, very complicated, difficult topic? Like this is a problem that, even like the Microsofts and Googles of the world spend a lot of time and a lot of money thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. And anyone who says you don't need to think about this is not legally on good footing, I think, with that, and or morally, in my opinion. So it's not something you can just choose to not think about. And this has been a huge priority for Redwood. And this is all credit to Dom Sadie. He has really spearheaded this work. And what's cool is we did a whole stream with Ben Myers on the semantics stream. And we walked through what we kind of did here, what Dom did here. And it's about the router and about how single page applications work at a kind of fundamental level. Because if you don't kind of know the difference between like an old school server rendered kind of Rails thing versus a current JavaScript thing, the main thing is like, does all the code live on the server? Does all the code live on the client, like in the front end? So if all the code lives in the server, like a Rails, you generate just a whole bunch of HTML and kind of throw it over the wire. versus with something like Redwood or these single page applications, you have a bundle of JavaScript that is like the logic and the website itself. And you open that up, and as you click links, you're not sending another request back to the server to get a new page. Because if you're navigating around different pages, it's different HTML, you're hitting the server each time to get those pages to navigate. But that's not how this works. The single page applications, you get a whole bunch of stuff. And when you click links, JavaScript is being executed in your browser to navigate. And if you start doing that, it breaks a lot of assumptions of how the web works and how screen readers need to interpret what your site is doing. And the problem was, it came down, it's actually very simple, is that when you would click a link, it wouldn't know that you would navigate. So it wouldn't be able to announce that you navigate away from the page. So if you wanted to go to your contact page and you hit contact, if you have a screen reader, when you navigate to a page, it'll like say what the thing is, like, so because you can't see it, you're listening to it. And so what we had to do is we basically had to hack it into Redwood so that it would basically look at the page, find an H1, and then make that the title. So it was, and then to announce it. So it's like it's a route announcement component. And this was based on work from the Gatsby team and Marcy Sutton, especially, who had been researching this and trying to figure out how to make Gatsby's router accessible. So there's like a lot of research behind this. It's like very, very niche, deep, technical specific problem. But this is why we want to solve it at the framework level, because like having every single Redwood developer have to like figure out how to do this themselves just doesn't make any sense. We can leverage the fact that we're a framework with opinions. We bake in accessible opinions. That's a huge win for everybody.
1,000,000,000%. I think 1,000,000,000% agree, with the last statement. And, like really like good on you for good on the whole team and the whole thing. Definitely has my stamp of approval as far as, procedurally figuring out like, well, what is the best way, looking at the research and really solving like a real need, like through like software and through technology. And I think, if we're not doing very good things with, all the technology that we have, then it's, we're missing, we could just be doing more. We could be helping 100% if we just think about it. And, we're going to be working hard, and it's going to be challenging to complete it anyway. So it might as well also just benefit the most people. So it's very, very interesting there. And I think that is that thought.
Yeah, there's a lot kind of to dig in there in terms of how you think about this in terms of, is it 100%, are you accessible or not kind of question. And Ben, going back to the semantic stream, he was on FSJam just a couple days ago. Actually, his episode aired, and we had a whole episode about accessibility and talked about this very in depth if anyone is curious. And there's a lot of downstream effects that are really nice from thinking about design for accessibility that is good for everyone. But he really stressed what I really appreciate is that you can't ever decenter the disabled person's experience in this topic. Is that like that is the point of making it accessible. And so yeah, like that's just kind of what it comes down to. And so it requires dialogue with people who use these technologies and using them yourself to understand how they actually work and like what are the implications of your software when these pieces of technology are being used.
Completely. I remember I have a colleague that I've done some nonprofit work with, and they sat down and they're like, Josh, this is what it's like for me to be with my screen reader. And I remember they showed me between like, just like a font, like a decent website, and then like a really shitty application, or, I don't know if I can say it on the podcast, maybe we'll bleep that out, on a very, terrible version of a website. And it was really shocking to me to experience it firsthand. Like, oh, wow. And they're like, this is about maybe 70, 80% of my experience is the bad experience when I'm trying just to do things. But I've learned to cope with it. And I think it, like you mentioned, and I definitely want to listen to that podcast, like centering that experience is just like sort of the benchmark. And if you have that benchmark, then I can really understand how you're able to, I don't know, hit those marks and make really good design decisions based off of like, what is it like, whether it's like in the marketing or the product world, like, your customer avatar or your user story, like really getting deep into the demographic, psychographic, lived experience graphic of those individuals. And ultimately you're going to make a better product, or you're going to make a better, application at the end of the day. So I think it's really a win-win. It's just people need to think about it long enough in order to discover, like, yes, this is the right choice. Because I think, one thing that I'm always listening to our consultants talk about with clients, and always something we're always going back to in the consulting world is, well, what's your end goal? Like making sure that clients just have like a really good understanding, especially if they're coming to us and they're like, we're on Lotus servers and we want to go serverless, or it's like we have no experience and we need to do this lift. What should our milestones be, and how are we measuring success, and that sort of thing. Thankfully, there's a lot of great talent on our team, and we know so much about serverless. So it's those things are always sort of self-evident. Like once we get in there and start developing, like if the skill set is there, then you're able to see those results real quickly, because it's technology. Like the fundamentals are better than the last system, ideally, and so you're going to have a better product. But having a strong North Star vision, I think, is essential to the success of these things. And it sounds like Redwood, really is developing with that, which is really exciting. I can't think of many other frameworks or programs that are really featuring it in that way.
Yeah, totally. Something else that we can get into as well would be, so we talked about meta frameworks last time, right? And we were using that term for things like Redwood because Redwood is built on React, and there's AWS meta frameworks. And so that's why you got it. Like you understood what a meta framework was because you would use like the serverless framework, like serverless framework is a meta framework, it's a different kind of meta framework, but it's the same idea. And so I've been playing around with a lot of these kind of things, and the main ones being CDK and SAM, the serverless application model, and the cloud development kit. And what's I find really interesting is that these two could potentially merge into a super tool in some way. They're starting to integrate with each other. And I think that's really cool because that's not something that like a Redwood and Blitz could do. Like I'm very into like all these different kind of projects, like collaborating and communicating and talking about this stuff. Like there's no way to make those two things work together because like defeats the whole purpose. Whereas what's cool about SAM and CDK and all these kind of things that you also get a really nice integration with the infra itself because you're getting all of this like CloudFormation handled for you under the hood. And this is where Redwood has run into a lot of problems, is that we haven't had a deterministic build because we've had this like crazy yarn mono repo setup where you have these different, you have a package.json for your web and a package.json for your API. So you had to figure out how you copy both of those and then build them both. And it's just like a huge, ridiculous pain. And so by having all that set up with your infra as code, it's like makes it much easier to just do that. So I'm looking at now these different kind of options, and Amplify being another one. And I found that they each come at it from a different angle. Because CDK, it's you write code like in JavaScript or Python or TypeScript or something like that. And so that's the way you like think about your application. It's like a code first thing. And so it's imperative. And then SAM, the service application model, it's from the infra layer. So it's instead of you're starting from thinking about code, you're starting to think about like YAML, and your configuration is deterministic instead of it's declarative instead of imperative, and it's deterministic instead of undeterministic. And so, but both of them are you're still deploying these full stack things with code, and it's just about like where are you writing all that code, like where are you centering it, and how are you thinking about it, how do you want to structure it. And then Amplify thinks about it from an app level, thinks about, okay, what's your auth, what's your storage, what's like that kind of stuff. And so that's why there are three of these things, and they're all meant to give you a single nice integrated experience on AWS, but they all have a different idea of how you should do that and what you should kind of focus on, what you should optimize around. And so yeah, I've been kind of just like building a little proof of concepts like all those, and it's a great way to get into like CloudFormation because it generates CloudFormation for you, and it lets you write like a nicer kind of syntax that makes sense. So you just kind of like a weighing, so you like kind of write stuff that makes sense, and then it generates, and you look at it and be like, okay, I think I get it, and then rinse and repeat. And before you know it, you're reading CloudFormation like you're born reading it.
Absolutely. That's definitely one of the benefits of those tools, is it lets you just sort of like not like teach yourself, but like familiarize yourself around like a theory of best practice around like, how do I write this thing? And I think, that's always like a huge challenge, especially if you're trying to roll out those sort of skills, like at a team level. and everyone has different levels of familiarity. But if you're able to work off of a common style of doing something, then you're just going to go a lot faster. And then that way you're not trying to mix preferences between different team members, or mix idiosyncrasies, which may or may not make sense down the line, especially if, or that whole team of two people decide to leave the company, and then they're like, we're stuck with this thing that wasn't even written standardly. What do we even do? And so yeah, so that's a problem that like definitely want to avoid. And in different conversations I've had with people in the serverless space and at the framework level, I think we're moving towards a direction of figuring out, well, what is the best practice that we want to say is like the best practice, or ones that we want to continue to multiply within the industry and the space, and sort of set like this is this version of writing.
I'm very curious to ask you. So someone comes to you, they say, I'm building a stack on AWS. It's all on AWS. How do I build that? Should I use the serverless framework? Should I use something like SAM? Should I roll all myself? How would I think about that? And then they just give you like that blanket question.
Yeah, that can be a challenging question. In the past, and I would say, currently, like 9 times out of 10, we are most likely going to say, like serverless framework is the way to go, just because there's so much. I think one thing that we like about it so much as Serverless Guru is just like the third party application, like the plugins and the support around that, and we're able to just sort of leverage everyone else's use for our own use cases in that sort of way. However, there are certain fringe cases, I would say, in languages that maybe like aren't as supported, like there's hard requirements from the client to where this is all in C#, or this is all in Java or something. It may be, you're sort of at a point where, okay, it's not all things being equal. Who has like the best support for these use cases I'm trying to do with this language? And then at those times, it's like, oh, we should use SAM, or oh, we should use something else. I think there's getting to be like more competition, and there's a lot of really great ways to sort of handle like deployment now, which maybe wasn't the case. Or was something that I personally wasn't as familiar with. And so I think that extra, like whether it's like serverless framework or like Arc codes or SAM, or, just using CDK. I remember we did a poll on Talking Serverless a while ago, and it was like, what's your most popular frameworks that you like to use? And like serverless framework was big, but like Arc codes was high up there. A lot of people.
Yeah, shout out to Arc. Arc is really cool. I've messed around a little bit with Arc and Begin, and for me, I want to like just take Begin out of the question, play more with just Arc, because it's going back to the abstractions on CloudFormation. Like that's as abstract as it's going to get. It's like, I'm going to make a CloudFormation like 6 words. So I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I think it's really innovative and really cool, and I'm excited to see just like what happens. So if people don't know about them, certainly check it out. Just a question that I think we've been getting more on from the consulting side, or around the idea of like partners and partnerships, had to do with like trying to figure out, well, how do I decide to use like one service versus another? And as a consultancy, I think ultimately from my position, we have to do what's in the client's best interest, and that's always what we're always standing by, and trying to give the best understanding, like what's their end in mind, what's their goal, both like institutionally, the business goal, as well as the departmental team goals, because they're all related, but they're measured differently. That's how I would describe it. And just making sure that we're giving them a solution that can best get them there, with like as little roadblocks or imagined roadblocks as possible. And so there's situations where there may be like very niche tools, but for the speed that we need to move, or the speed that we need to move as safely as possible, we sort of can't use, maybe like the newest sort of thing, or it works in one instance, but as far as, can we guarantee this will be around in 10 years? Like Amazon, in some way, shape, or form, probably AWS, Google, Azure, they're going to be around in some way, shape, or form, because a lot of these companies are looking to make their next 10 to 30 year decision, and so they're not as able to pivot from that sort of conversation. So we like to take all those things into account when recommending, like, oh, train your whole team on SAM, or train your whole team in serverless framework.
Yeah, I think you want to train your team in enough they need to know at the base layer to do any of those frameworks, because ultimately most of them are all doing the same thing at the end of the day. So once you kind of understand what the actual infra underneath is, and you've like got the pain of clicking around an AWS dashboard to set it up, and then have someone give you like a whole just line of code or just file of lines and lines of code, like here it is, then you just run a command, you do it. Once you have that experience, you're just like, I'm sold, like never again. And then you have to look at, though, as you say, how long has this thing been around for? How stable is it going to be? How similar or different is it from other things around it? And I usually think going with, if you need to give a default answer, you should go with whoever's around the longest, is the most stable and is the least likely to break and change. But there's also the question, I think, of this is an app that's going to live on, and so who is inheriting this app? Where are they coming from? Like, how would they think about it? And what would be the tools that would make the most sense for them, especially as we get in this world where you can write any language you want in these things, because we're at the point now where most of these like kind of serverless runtimes have like really good support for JavaScript and Python. First off, those are always going to be the first two. And then you get kind of Ruby and like PHP is the next two kind of like dynamic languages, and then Java and .NET and Go for kind of like your static languages. But with things like WebAssembly, we're eventually going to be able to write any language we want everywhere. And like, I don't think that's like super close. I think that's still quite a few years off. But that's where this is going. And so it's going to get back at this question of like polyglot programming and this huge like microservice sprawl and all this different stuff. So coming from Redwood, I like conventions. I like having opinions. So all those things are, to me, are good things. And you have to be aware of what the different sets of opinions are at least available to you. So you can weigh them against each other. And then if you do decide you need to build your own thing, then you can do that and build your own thing. But you can't do that until you evaluate the other options first.
Absolutely. And I think, if one can understand sort of like whatever bias or assumptions are baked into like the decisions at the front end, and, that having that documented so everyone knows, rather than, I've been sent some documents around. I know some people are thinking about like, oh, we want to use this framework. And then it's like, these are the meeting notes from that. And then you read it and it's like, this person says we need to use SAM. Everyone else agreed. Five other lines of conversation. Someone asks, well, why do we use SAM? And then it's just like, because it's the best. And then it's like, okay. And then it's like, that's the reason why. And it's like, who knows why that person thought that was the right decision. And in that case, maybe it was. Like, I'm not saying like it was or wasn't, but I can't remember in that instance. But it's, making sure that like the paper trail of ideas exists effectively. That's only going to help people down the line to where it's like, oh, why did we decide to use this Java Lambda? It's like, oh, because we just gave this project to the Java developer and they made it work. And it's like everything else is written, in like Node, or it's like we're using Python instead. So it's good to have those solid foundations. Another thing on the topic of like teaching and like educating teams, I saw on your Twitter profile, you added like another thing as like Lambda School dropout, and Serverless Guru is very what is it? I think we've been contemplating a lot about like the state of serverless education, and just the state of like educating the next generation of like devs, or the next generation of like technology builders. And I'd love to get your thoughts around like, I don't know, as far as like, I don't know, I remember several years ago, maybe it was last year before coronavirus or a little bit before that, I remember seeing this headline that said like, there's a developer bubble from all these code schools and they'll never be able to find jobs. You should just never go to code school ever again. And now there's like a hiring recession I've seen on LinkedIn. That's what they say. There isn't like enough people who have the technical skills to do these jobs. So I'm wondering, what is the state of like, technology builder education? And like, as far like, is there a future for code schools? Is there a code school model that you think will be the best? Or I don't know. I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, the Lambda School dropout thing, it's I'm trying to capture the nuance that exists with inherent to this conversation, which is that it is in one sense an endorsement of Lambda, because I'm saying, hey, I went to Lambda. I'm like branding myself along with Lambda. But it's also like, why'd you drop out though? This school is so great. Shouldn't you have like graduated? And that's the thing, is that there's no simple answer to, is this like a quote unquote like good boot camp in terms of like will you definitely get a job? You can ask, is this a good boot camp in terms of curriculum, in terms of like how the assignments are structured, in terms of what's the payment structure like. So you have to ask those questions first of all. And Lambda has been in the news recently for people who follow like niche Silicon Valley kind of news for having like a round of layoffs. And so lots of people have been asking me about it to comment on it. And I think it's comes down to the churn inherent to what they're trying to do, because they're offering this platform for anyone to come in and literally just show up on day one and just start doing it without paying a single dollar. And they don't have to give you any money whatsoever. And it's a crazy thing that's something that can exist and people can have access to it. And that's great, but that's hard. Like, that's not something that aligns with the way we usually think about this kind of stuff. And just teaching people to code in general is really, really hard and requires a lot of time. And like, it just requires being a specific kind of like personality. But anyone who wants to like really put in the time and effort to do it, I think can. But the problem is most people get into it not really knowing what it's gonna be. They just like computers are cool and like it's gonna pay super well, and like people don't necessarily get the best information about these programs beforehand. So that's why I try to really capture the nuance of like, for me, going to Lambda was a positive thing. It helped me get to where I needed to be to contribute to Redwood. But Lambda didn't really get me a job. Like, Redwood got me a job. And the reason why that happened is because I essentially dropped out of Lambda to do Redwood instead. Like, I ran away and joined the circus is what I did. And that's the kind of thing that at the time, like, you can't say whether that was a good decision or not until it like had already worked out months down the line, you know? So you want to just talk to students who've actually gone to the school and talk to people who've taught at the school if you really want to kind of get a take on this. So Dustin Myers was one of my teachers who had been laid off in this round, and he was bummed out, but he left saying that he thought his experience at Lambda had been great and that Lambda was doing amazing work and that he was fully in support of what they're still doing. And I think that speaks a lot to Lambda and what they've built and the amount of people they have helped. And like in Redwood, like we interact with people from Lambda all the time. They hack on stuff with Redwood. That's super cool. And yeah, so Lambda's awesome. Don't trust like these really bad kind of like media hit pieces written about them. They're not perfect. So getting back to why I think layoffs happen, I think it's because there's a lot of churn in the program. And so they try new programs. Sometimes they don't really work. So they have to get rid of them and try newer programs. They're trying a newer program that could be amazing. It's going to be a more back-end heavy, AWS DevOps heavy integrated program where they're going to learn how to work with AWS. So that could be incredible. And it's hard because then they have so much funding. It's like millions and millions and millions of dollars. So there's just a lot of activity happening around it, and it's hard to kind of get a handle on it. But one of my good friends is going there right now, actually, who I know back from when we were both music majors together. And so he obviously asked me about my experience and if, I think he should do Lambda or not. And it was like 2 months ago. And I said, yeah, like based on your experience, like, I think you would thrive in it. And he's been having a ball. Like he's doing great. He's having a ton of fun. So yeah, that's kind of my general take on it there.
Oh, completely. With like all education, I think, there is like some truth to like sort of the axiom of like, you get like what you put in. And I think, what is it? In like I think across all industries, whenever you have something like having a low barrier to entry, it's really fantastic because like it makes it accessible to whole groups of people that would never be able to have access to it. Like that's fantastic. Though having some barriers, whether it is like, I don't know, like submitting previous work or like having applications, it does reduce or it creates like a more sophisticated applicant, not sophisticated in like skill, but as far as like understanding that like this is exactly what I want to get into. And like this is exactly
what I want. There needs to be a vetting
want.
Process. This is actually important. You should not go to a bootcamp that does not have some sort of vetting process where you have to do some sort of like exercises with JavaScript or whatever beforehand. If they let anyone join, just kind of go, like, that's not good. Like because you actually need to give someone at least some sort of idea of what they're actually going to be doing. So Lambda did this, and most boot camps do this, where they have you build like a super simple HTML and CSS site and then do some JavaScript examples that you have to like run tests against. And it's just like write a function, stuff like that. So yeah, that's like the base. That's just like, do you actually want to do this? And like, and if you can't do that, like you don't want to do a code school, you know? So, but yeah, there has to be at least something like that. But in terms of like it being open to everyone, like accessible to everyone, like that's the thing.
I need to look at this new program because I like the idea of having like an integrated process with like AWS. I remember like a long time ago, I was like given that advice of like, oh, like, because my partner went to code school and like Ryan went to code school as well. And so like, I'm around like an ecosystem of people like who are very successful in their tech careers because of like going to code school, going to boot camps, rather than having like a 4-year CS degree and a 2 years master degree in like algorithms. That isn't as much my experience that I've been around. So it's really great to see that like there's this more potential for using and learning like very modern tools, because you can do so many innovative things with a knowledge of the AWS ecosystem. And I've also been having more conversations with organizations and communities that just like organize events around like teaching students either in code school or out of code school. Serverless Guru recently had their first like real official cohort of serverless interns. Gosh, who knows when it was. I think it was before the end of 2020. Time is definitely still blurring together for me. And we got some really good feedback around like, hey, we really enjoyed how you weren't like, this was so different, like you weren't like holding our hands, you were making us sort of look at problems, figure out, well, this could be a solution to this, and then guiding us around like building it and like learning by doing that, and having that experience would made them just very, very successful and very fulfilled right after like more of a traditional code school experience.
Well, this is great that you mentioned this actually, because there's this company Mintbean who the founders I've been good friends with for a while now via Redwood, and they do hackathons, which they also call like learn and hacks. And the idea is that people who are kind of right out of code school and are still trying to get jobs, it's a way for them to continue to build on those skills and also to work with, like you say, people who are building these things that can get some guidance on their projects and working with the tech. And then you get such good feedback on like how your docs actually make sense and whether your CLI actually works or not and all that kind of stuff. So it's huge. And the feedback loop you can get from that is really incredible. So shout out to Mintbean. They're really amazing in doing that exact kind of work.
Yeah, recently Mintbean's been on our radar, and I think we're really interested in just like learning more about them, what they do, because it seems just very, very unique. So
Cool.
Awesome that you brought that up. Yeah, no, that's rocking, and that sort of thing. Now I know we're cresting up to the limit of our time and everything, but I don't want to keep you forever. I know you're probably having like 8 different podcasts today, and you got to let the voice rest a bit. But anything else that you want to sort of touch on or break? I know we've really painted a great breath stroke, I would say, of just the various topics we've been talking about today.
Yeah, I'd say if you're looking for the Redwood stuff, that should be all in our kind of last episode that we did. And redwoodjs.com has got everything you'll ever need there. And then I'll point people to just stepzen.com. That's where you can find us there, what we're doing. And then, yeah, fsjam.org is my podcast as well. So those are all the kind of things I'm doing. And then there's the React Podcast Discord is worth checking out as well. And the open source Discord. Those are 2 other things that are like open source, not in the sense of someone like Redwood, where it's like this huge, crazy project, more in the sense like a bunch of friends getting together and building something for fun and to kind of like hack on something and to like build their skills. And then maybe one day for it to be something super awesome one day. But that's been really cool. And we've just been learning all this stuff like GitHub Actions and stuff like that. So events.lunch.dev is where you can find a lot of that. And yeah, that should be all the main stuff. Thanks for having me, Josh. I always really enjoy our conversations. You are so similar to me and how you think about this kind of stuff, but you're in like the serverless world, which is great because like we're kind of like to a certain extent not entirely integrated with it. We're kind of like built on top of it with things like Redwood. But I think that there's like going to be so many interesting things happening with these types of frameworks and like how they're going to be deployed and how this is all going to be stitched together with these platforms. So the more that people can kind of like talk to each other and collaborate with it and just kind of like wrap our minds around like what this stuff even is all for the better.
Absolutely, we're on like the the outer edge of the things that are getting built and tested and created with all this. So it's always exciting to talk to someone who's also in the space and spending so much time, like very niched into a specific spot. I know, what is it on on your podcast? I was listening to the what is it? I think the last one I was listening to was like like to fork or not to fork, and I found that really interesting because I don't know, I'm not pushing a ton as much code as I used to, and so it's like, oh no, if there's forks, maybe it means the project's not so good.
The context there is not, it's not any fork. We're talking about Blitz forking Next.js. We're talking about forking the most popular React framework. Like that's like when Node forked, so it's like it's a really big deal. It's like Ethereum forking.
Yeah, no, that is intense. I've been going down my own rabbit holes around blockchains and smart contracts, and what is this a soft fork, hard fork, XYZ. Maybe that'll be we'll spend some more time, come back in several months.
Get you on FHJam to talk about some of that.
potentially. But I'll have us wrap up here. We'll end on a cliffhanger. Thank you so much, Anthony, again, and thank you so much, all the listeners, to the Talking Serverless podcast. I hope you enjoyed the listen, and anything that you are wanting to follow up on, you can see all the information from these different websites as well as Anthony's handle in the show notes. Have a fantastic rest of your day.